DNF, did not finish. Almost every ultra runner will eventually have one. Being a new runner or a pro runner, it really doesn't change anything. Every time you line up for a race, DNF might be the outcome. And it sucks. All of the hard work, all of the sacrifice, yet still falling short. And it's not just that. You're gonna be, of course, in physical pain, but also in emotional pain. But it's not all negative. Failing is part of success. Failure is never permanent. You can always improve, you can always come back. And that's what we'll talk about today. How can you use a DNF as a tool to grow, to improve as a runner so that you can come back stronger and succeed in the future? Hi, Simon here. Welcome to my channel. I'm an experienced ultra runner, and this channel is meant to inspire you and provide you tips to have your own adventure out there. These tips are geared towards new runner, but also experienced ultra runner to push our own limit, to learn from each other, and to have great adventure. Today is part 2 of my discussion on DNF. Last week, we talked about how to prevent DNF, and today we're talking about how to deal with DNF. Because no matter what you do, no matter how much training you have, yes, you can reduce the risk of DNF, but you cannot fully prevent it. We don't have control over everything that will happen on race day. And the reality is that sometimes DNF will be the outcome, and sometimes DNF is the right outcome and the right decision at that time. And one of my big goals with this DNF series is to normalize DNF. Failing is part of success. To grow in life, you need to be challenged. And to be challenged means that you're pushing your limits. DNF is very common in ultra running. These races are meant to challenge you, to push you to your limits. And when you go to these limits, you will learn a lot about yourself. How you deal with adversity, how you deal with unexpected, and how you deal with failure. And this is really what I want to talk about today, how to deal with failure so that you turn that into a positive, you turn that into a growth opportunity. Let's address the elephant in the room before you run to the comment section. Am I the most qualified to talk about how to deal with DNF? I've raced 4,400 miler, finished all of them. Please hear me out, okay? I think I've done quite a few tip videos, and I hope that you can agree that they're well researched. It's not only based on my experience, but also people that are close to me. More broadly, this is about how you deal with adversity and failure, both in racing, but also in your life. So some of my race, I had time goals. I didn't necessarily mention it, but yes, I fell short and felt extremely bad about it. It's not the same as a DNF, but same, I failed to meet my goals. And in my personal life or my professional life, of course, I had to deal with failure, but I am where I am today because I've been able to deal with failure, both emotionally, but also growing from that. Dealing with DNF, dealing with failure has a lot to do about emotional maturity, how you deal with failure, and how you don't let that impact what you think about yourself, but you still take that as a lesson, you take that as a learning opportunity as opposed to living in denial. And I think there's a fine balance between feeling bad about failure, but also just straight up denying the mistakes that you've done. And finally, why don't you help me out here? Yes, I put this video, this is my take on it, but I'm curious to hear your story. We can learn from each other, and maybe the comments below is a great opportunity to share and learn from each other. What is your experience? What do you think was helpful? What do you think was challenging in dealing with DNF? We're all different. We're all gonna deal with DNF differently, and every DNF is different. But there's a common theme, and DNF sucks. This is not the outcome you were lining up for. This is not why you trained for. You trained to see that finish line and you didn't. And it sucks. You'll have a lot of different emotion all at once. It will be very difficult to process, and everyone will be different with that. And every DNF will feel slightly different based on what actually happened. Was it somewhat expected? Did you know coming in that you were underprepared? Or maybe it's a shock. You thought you were well prepared and something happened that totally derailed your day. You can be sad, you can be angry, you can be confused, you can be disappointed, you could be ashamed. There's so many emotions, and I think it's good when you're dealing with a high flow of emotion like that to take some time and have these emotions, not denying that we're a human being and you will have a flow of negative emotion that will go through you.
Good. I can feel your anger. Let the hate flow through you.
There's no emotion associated to a DNF that is wrong. There's better ways to deal with that, but we're all human. Let that flow through you. Give yourself some time to process. It's even okay to give yourself some time to feel bad about it. Because that's a common theme with all of these emotions, is that a DNF sucks. You know, you've trained so much, you've spent so much effort into that, and it's okay to admit it. It sucked. It was a bad day. This is not what you wanted. Live your emotion, take some time, and once it dies down a little bit, then we can be a little bit more analytical about it, and then we can learn from it. But right now, live your emotion. It sucks, man. It really sucks. And I think I already slipped a little bit. I didn't want to use that word at the beginning of this video, but I did. It's the word failure. And sometimes what you hear is people will say DNF means did not fail. And that's okay, you can say that, but I actually disagree with that. You had some goals, and one of the primary goals was to see that finish line. One of the primary goals that you had was to not DNF, was to finish, and you did not finish. You failed to meet your goal. And I think we live in a society that is a little uncomfortable about failure. We almost sometimes want to live in denial and call it the participant trophy era or whatever. But I think it's normal to feel uncomfortable with failure, but you shouldn't live in denial. Yeah, this is not the outcome that you were working towards. This is a failure. We feel bad about it. But if we live in denial about that, if we deny the fact that this is a failure, I think we're losing a great growth opportunity. But as much as a DNF sucks, I think where you really need to draw the line is that you don't suck. And that's a huge difference. It was very uncomfortable, very unpleasant. You fell short. And yes, you have some blame for that. But you as an individual remain someone who's fantastic. We're not perfect, and that's okay. It's okay to look back and see what you did wrong. Because failure is part of growing, but it's an unpleasant step in growing. Think of it a little bit like training, working out. It's not necessarily always pleasant or comfortable, but you need to do that to become a faster runner, a better runner. Same thing with the DNF. It's extremely unpleasant, but if you make the most out of it, it becomes a tool to grow. An unpleasant step, sure, a step that we would love to skip, but a step nonetheless for self-improvement. So once the passion dies down a little bit, now it's time to be a little bit more objective. Now it's time for introspection. And I think this is probably the most important. Once you're able to control your emotion, it's having this honest introspection. It's looking back, dissecting and understanding what happened. You're setting yourself up for failure again and again when you're living in denial. You need to take time to sit down, think through that in a very neutral way. You're an observer here. You're neutral. You're not judging. You're observing. You're dissecting what happened. And I think one of the things that is important here is that we tend to do that kind of introspection and thinking of what went wrong when we failed. And I think even when you succeed, you should do an after action. You should look back and think what went right, what went wrong. Because even in success, maybe you were just lucky. And if you look back, that's what you'll see. Wow, I was very lucky to still be able to succeed in that endeavor. And that only happens if you're able to be very objective about it. Because if you succeed, I can guarantee there are things that you can still improve. And if you fail, even when you fail, there are things that went well. There are things that you did right, but there are things that you could improve. Just write down what happened and go to the root cause of what actually happened. When people look back at why they DNF, I think we often overfocus on a specific thing and we don't really dive deep enough to actually learn from that. Say, for example, you had blisters. It was really painful and you stopped. It's easy to think the blister was the problem. That's why I had a DNF. Yes, that's superficially right, but how well did you actually prepare your feet? How well did you research your gear? How well did you look into your shoes and your socks to make sure you wouldn't have blisters? Now you might be thinking, well, Simon, it's kind of the same thing. It's not, because yes, today was a blister. You might be able to resolve the blister issue specifically, but we just mentioned that maybe you didn't spend enough time finding the right gear for you. And maybe next time it won't be blisters, it will be chafing. You'll bleed out of your ass and you'll drop again. And even then, okay, blisters are bad, blisters are painful. How strong is your mind game? Could you have gone a little further? And I'm not saying you should never stop because of blisters, but maybe sometimes if your mind game had been a little stronger, if you had wanted it more, if you had pushed through the pain, you would have seen that finish line. I cannot say that without actually seeing, but we need to be honest with ourselves and think, did I let this issue get to my head? Maybe you were sick, maybe you were throwing up. So yeah, sure, nutrition, but did you let that issue get to your head? Could you have slowed down a little bit, take a little bit more time and regroup to go back again? Or as soon as you start having severe adversity, you stopped? And again, maybe stopping was the right decision, and maybe it was not. You're the only one who can look back at what happened and decide, was this the right call or not? Because you need to live with that DNF, and I don't think we should live with regrets, but I think it's okay to be honest with yourself. Maybe after a DNF, you feel, yeah, that was definitely the right decision. I was getting injured, continuing would have been a mistake, and even potentially, maybe you pushed too much. Maybe you should have stopped earlier. Hindsight is 2020, but yeah, maybe you have regret that you didn't DNF quickly enough. Or maybe you're looking back and you're thinking, I could have gone a little further, or I could have taken 30 minutes at that aid station, eat, drink, sleep for 30 minutes, and see if I want to go. And I think this is something that is really uncomfortable to think, well, yeah, I did pull the plug a little too early, or yeah, I really got into my head and really couldn't problem solve at the time. But looking back, yeah, there were solutions that I didn't find. And I think another issue that we have kind of a little bit in society is that we're almost embarrassed to not be perfect. Look, we're human. We make mistakes. We don't always push to the fullest. We don't always go 100% effort. Like, that's normal. Of course, there are tough people out there who are always working out at 4 a.m. They're so hardcore. But human beings are not perfect. Your training was probably not perfect. During the race, maybe you paced too fast at the beginning. You knew you were supposed to go slow, but you got excited. Look, that's okay that you do mistakes. You will never prevent all mistakes, and you shouldn't feel bad to not be perfect. But you should identify what were these imperfections and not feel bad about it, but say, hey, yeah, that was kind of dumb. I kind of went out too fast. I was running with the pros for the first 10 miles, and then I was puking, and then I DNF. Yeah, that was kind of stupid. Don't feel bad about it, but learn from it. And next time, maybe don't do that. But before we dive any deeper, what are your experiences? How do you deal with DNF? How can others learn from your own experience so that they can grow themselves? Let us know in the comments below. If you think this video is helpful, please leave a thumbs up, share with your friends. Thanks for watching. I think a huge mistake when people deal with DNF and analyze these things is you have to take accountability, ownership. There are a lot of things that you cannot control on race day. That's true. There are things that can happen to you that you did everything perfectly, and because of what happened, there's no way you could have finished it. But you need to be very honest about it, because life isn't fair. So yes, something bad could have happened on race day, but could you still finish? It was not fair. Other people didn't have to deal with that. But maybe you could still have finished, maybe you could have problem solved. Life isn't fair, racing isn't fair, and sometimes, you'll get the short stick. Sometimes it sucks. And once you're analyzing, think more about what you could have done differently. Not what happened to you, but is there anything you could have done to deal with the situation? And I can give example here. For example, more than once, an aid station or a water station just didn't have fluids anymore. No water. There was one in particular, it was in a desert race, it was really hot, it was the middle of the day, and I think that changed a 6 mile into a 10 mile or something like that. That's a huge difference. Everyone got dehydrated for that. And I'm sure some people have DNF because of that, because they got dehydrated and they were never able to come back from that. That sucks. And it's easy to blame the race organization. And yes, they did a mistake and they should change that. But instead of focusing on the bad thing that happened to you, because it stinks. You should have had water. You were planning for that. You can look back and say, okay, what could I have done differently? And one that is obvious for me in this case is if you're doing a desert race, you shouldn't calculate flat the amount of water that you need and that you're carrying. You should always have a little extra. What if you had missed a turn and you were off course for 3 miles, you need to come back? That would have been on you. And what would you do? You would still be dehydrated. So you need to have some level of buffer with water and fluid in this specific case. And if you fail because of something that is outside of your control, try to think, what else could I have done? Instead of thinking, man, that really sucks. What else could you have done? Sometimes there's nothing you could have done. And sometimes it's true. You can say it was outside of my control. The precaution I could have taken were unrealistic. And again, hindsight is 2020. Don't feel bad that you didn't do it the first time, but take the good lesson from that, because it can happen again. And Even if you succeeded, for example, the headlamp situation that I mentioned, I used to have a headlamp, battery, and a safety light. And since then, usually what I do is I have 2 headlamps and a safety, because that was a near miss. If my safety light hadn't functioned far enough, I would have been in big doo-doo, and that would have led to a DNF. And that's where I meant do an after action report, yes, when you fail, but also when you succeed, and try to identify these near miss. And once you've done that introspection, once the emotions are a little bit more under control, once you've come to terms with the DNF itself, if you have close friends, especially if they're experienced ultra runner, I think it's good to talk about it. Having these honest discussions will help you understand that first, DNF is normal and we should normalize that. Second, DNF are not always hardcore, you were struck by lightning or something like that, you had to be hospitalized. It should never go that far. It really should never go that far. And the good thing about talking about it is, first, when you did your after action report, you need to be very neutral. You need to be more an observer than the person that was in the situation. And now by talking with other people that are experienced, they will do the same. And if they're very close to you, they can be brutally honest about it. And sometimes they will have had the same issue and say, yeah, that has happened to me too. And now that's why I carry Imodium all the time, because I shit so much that I was dehydrated and need to quit, or I had this specific issue and this is how I've solved it. So learning from each other is pretty important. But of course, you need to be close to these people because it needs to be a very honest discussion. It needs to go past the, good job, terrible, oh yeah, you did the right decision. No, it needs to be very honest, and you cannot be that honest with everyone, unfortunately. It needs to be someone who you're trusting and someone that has the experience and some kind of a mentor. And sometimes that can be difficult to find, if your running circle is not as experienced, or maybe you're embarrassed to talk about it or not feeling great to talk about it. Another option is, okay, you had a DNF, you thought you could do that by yourself, maybe you don't have a coach. Would a coach be a good option here? Coach have a lot of experience themselves usually, but also have seen a lot of different athletes struggle with a lot of specific problem. If you did a good after action report, you can talk about that with your coach in a very problem solving oriented fashion, where your coach will be able to propose solution and prepare you better for next time. If you're looking for a coach, my friend Coach Brian, we have the podcast Buckle Up, which I suggest you have a look. Coach Brian is an experienced ultra runner. He's done Leadville, I think, 9 times. He's a good friend of mine. He's always taking athletes. So if you're curious, you can have a look at his website so that you can learn the right lesson from your DNF and you can succeed next time. Because that's the next step. Yeah, we looked at what happened, we identified the problem, and now we're going to solve the problem. Now we're going to make a plan to resolve all of these issues. And not just the key issue. Like I mentioned, yeah, maybe the blisters weren't great, but how was your nutrition? Were you on top of nutrition? Are there other things that you would change to have a better day? And that's also something that you should do when you succeed, obviously, but when you fail too, because from my experience, at least most DNF that I've seen, yes, there is one major issue, but usually there's also a few follow-up issues that, yeah, the major one was the reason you actually dropped, but also maybe your mind game wasn't there. Maybe you had blister, maybe you're chafing out of your ass, but at the end of the day, the reason you quit was because you were puking. How about solving all of these issues instead of focusing on the one? And I think a lot of preventing DNF, as I mentioned before, comes in training, comes in preparation. If you wrote down the problem that you had, now focus on resolving all of them. Focus on if you would go back with the same race, the same thing happening, how would you change that DNF into a finish? And the last piece I want to talk about a little bit is how can you best support someone who has a DNF? And I want to thank Leanne for proposing that. I think that's a great topic and it's a very difficult one to address. But let's talk a little bit about it. And I'm curious in the comments below, as always, what would help you the best if you have a DNF? How can people support you? And I think that's very tricky because every DNF is different. The reason why you DNF will change how I would approach someone who has a DNF, but also how close am I to this person? If it's someone I'm very close to, I will feel comfortable being very honest about it. And it's not being judgmental, but it's the brutal truth, the honesty that will help them grow. And it's not something I would do with a stranger necessarily, It's the, do I look fat in that dress? So the closeness I have to someone will change the level of depth I will go in my discussion. But also the timing of when you're trying to support someone is pretty important. A bajillion people will come and say, oh, you DNF, what happened? What happened? And we're still in that phase of processing the emotion of what happened. And maybe you don't feel like telling so many people over and over what happened. So I think it's good to leave a little breather and let the person come to you. Immediately after a DNF is maybe not the time to say, well, did you push hard enough? How was your mental game? Take some time to offer some emotional support first instead of problem solving, because that's also the thing. I myself, that's the shortcoming that I have for sure, is that I'm very problem solving oriented. So if someone comes to me, that will be my reaction, is to try and offer a solution. But potentially the person is not looking for that right now or ever. They can do it by themselves. They don't want to hear a lecture about how you can deal with blisters. What they want to hear right now is that you are there for them, that you will support them emotionally, that you're not judging them, that you agree with them. There's no point continuing a race if you're in pain. You made the right decision. It's not about you, it's about having a bad day. These sorts of kind of emotional support and adjusting based on how the person is feeling. Not saying, well, have you tried like these toe socks, that they would solve your problem? That's not what the person is ready to hear right now. And that will just not be helpful. DNF, and more broadly in life, failure, it's uncomfortable, it's unpleasant. We never want that to happen. But just like dying or taxes, you cannot avoid it. But what you can do is make that a productive experience, a growth experience. It's uncomfortable, but we can turn that into a positive. You can learn lesson from that and become stronger. And although I think we should always strive for success, we shouldn't feel bad about failing sometimes. That's part of growing. That's part of success. Failure is part of success. And because sometimes, and in fact, most of the time, a DNF was the right decision on that day. So you shouldn't live in regret. What you should do is think about, what could I have done differently? And most of the things you could have done differently aren't on race day. Race day was, unfortunately, kind of too late. It was the preparation before that. Maybe you could have done things differently to learn your lesson, to not make the same mistake again, so that you can see that finish line in the future. And the last thing, the thing I really want to emphasize in this two-part series about DNF is that I would really want us to normalize DNF, really want to normalize failure, not banalize it, but normalize. Because what truly matters is not to live a life where you will never fail. That would be boring. That means you're never pushing your limits. No, what really matters is that you live to the fullest. And just leaving you with a quote that I think is very inspiring and very true, which is, success is not final, failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. And with that, thanks for watching. I hope this was helpful. In the comments below, share your story, share your tips. How did you deal with DNF? How can you support someone living a DNF? If you appreciate this video, if you think that was helpful, please leave a thumbs up, share with your friends. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.